While many in our country look forward to a day like today being Mother's Day, there's a tremendous amount of pain, a tremendous amount of grief, and a tremendous amount of deafening silence as it relates to action and words coming from our government. These are things Trinidad and Tobago has grown accustomed to, but we in the United National Congress, the loyal opposition, we continue to fight and advocate on your behalf and bring to the fore the relevant issues affecting the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. This morning, I want to hand you over to Senator David Nakin, who will take us through several of the critical issues that are affecting the country at this moment, and then I'll take you further into today's development. Senator Nakin.
Thank you, Honorable MP. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, I would like to wish all the mothers of Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension the Caribbean, Happy Mother's Day on behalf of the United National Congress and our esteemed political leader, Kamala Persad-Bissessor. We, especially of the United National Congress, we recognize the journeys of our mothers throughout this country. We recognize how hard that journey has become, especially under such a very uncaring government as Keith Christopher Rowley's PNM government. But we are the first to hail, to laud, to praise the mothers of Trinidad and Tobago who have kept our societies together with unerring dedication and sacrifice to the national cause, to the cause of our children, whether they be in South and Central, on the East-West corridor. Everywhere our mothers have sacrificed themselves and dedicated themselves to a duty that we can never comprehend. And I base that on my mother's own journey, Rita Harris Nakin, who was born in the hills of Laventille, grew up in poverty, and had the wherewithal, the support of her village to take that decision, that initiative, to travel to England at the age of 16 years old to pursue nursing, rising to the top of the nursing profession by being the first matron of the Mount Hope General Hospital. Her journey for me serves until now as an inspiration, and to many of the nurses who she guided under her watch. And that brought me to link the most unfortunate of circumstances that occurred right in the vicinity of where my mother practiced most of her profession throughout the years. And that is the Queen's Park Savannah. I remember my mother telling me fondly how I came as much as a surprise to her and my father, being the last born. She had twins before me who subsequently died, and they were very worried at her age about my own survival. She told me, 9 months between the Holy Name Chapel, right next to the hospital, and the Queen's Park Savannah, walking up and down to ensure that she would have a successful delivery. And I linked that Queen's Park Savannah to the most tragic of incidents, where we had recently that unfortunate Gabriel Raphael, who was murdered right under the nose of Whitehall, the nose of President's House, right under their purview. She was murdered. And I'd like to refer to an article written by Alicia Shamley, who called or mentioned her tragic murder as almost being an invisible person. No one spoke about her. She was there for 3 days, left without anyone to identify her. And this is not a one-off. This has been occurring over the years, especially in the last 8 years of the governance, or so-called governance, of Christopher Rowley. We've had many instances. Shanti Riley, we social fabric. When we look at the social construct of what Trinidad and Tobago has become under Christopher Rowley in the last 8 years, black and brown people who are poor are invisible to Christopher Rowley. He does not care about them. So when we look, and we base this on statistics, on facts, when we see Christopher Rowley being awarded a doctorate, and as the president of Howard so wrongly stated that he has helped education. One of the driving factors, as I stated before, in my mother's own journey in taking me out of poverty, under Christopher Rowley, education has been cut like no other government in the history of our country. He was issued a doctorate because of his work in education. When healthcare has been decimated under Christopher Rowley, like no other government, he was lauded for his improvement in the healthcare system. When oil and gas was shut down basically by Christopher Rowley, he was spoke of in glowing terms about his accomplishments in this sector. My point is, it's not the narrative of the media or those who are supposed to be responsible for what we digest as information. It's not their responsibility to let us know what the government has done under Christopher Rowley. It is our responsibility to research and listen to the facts. And no one said it better than Attorney Kyle Clarkson in his piece today in the Express, where he said there has become a collective indifference from our population as regards the tragedies that occurred under this Christopher Rowley PNM government. When Rowley can easily have events and frame them to our public as public policy, as social policy, and we remain silent. Again, I go back to the word, a collective indifference to the realities of our situation. We know that there is suffering. We know that along the East-West corridor, in particular, the crime rate has soared. Almost 7 murders a day. And what did Christopher Rowley do? He had no problem because he's aware how much he has dumbed down this society. He has no problem to tell the nation that he's long due for a holiday in Barbados, which we know to be basically another piece of mendacity on his part. Rowley basically went to Barbados to cover up his tracks as to what he's facing now in the Brent Thomas affair. But we leave that for later. We go back to that tragic incident of Gabriel Raphael, because there's a whole story behind that. We forget that our mothers, each have their own individual story as we celebrate them on this day. They have their own story. And not only was this Gabriel's story a tragic one, it reflects on our own collective indifference. She would have been 16 years old when Christopher Rowley came into power. She fell through the cracks at every level. Socially, educationally, mentorship-wise, at every level she fell through the cracks. Christopher Rowley and his government had nothing in place to enable what we call that village. as Alicia Shamali referred to. She was community-less, Gabrielle Raphael. There was no village surrounding her. And you know, when we hear our citizens talk about it takes a village and the village should, let me tell you something. Our taxpayers' money is what should allow for this government to show up that village that we so speak about. That village is not something abstract or in esoteric terms. That village is real. That village is living. So you can't just talk about a village without talking about the resources that enable that village. So Gabrielle Raphael, who at every level it seems, fell through those gaps that this Keith Christopher Rowley government has widened like no other government in the history of our country, and I say like no other government in the history of the Caribbean. And we see our citizens talking about, well, parents should take responsibility and all of that, and we are aware that that is indeed the case. But you cannot give somebody a knife and tell him to go into a battle where there's guns. You have to give people, you have to arm citizens, especially when you have the patrimony of the country at your hands. When you have the resources of the country at your hands. There has to be some level of equitable distribution. And even more so, leading to the side or lending on the side of the people who are disenfranchised. And I continue to add, most of these poor and brown, black and brown people that are invisible to Keith Christopher Rowley are to be found in the constituencies that his government controls. Are to be found in the constituencies that he and his government have represented for over 52 years. And I know we'll hear the normal argument, but why do these people continue to vote against their interests? We, as the United National Congress, we are concerned with their welfare and how we can elevate their life story, their life experiences. But you don't empathize. You don't relate to people at that level when you find yourself on the Gulf Coast while the country is awash with murders, is awash with social suffering, is awash with mothers, daughters, sisters being raped and killed in the savannah. The savannah has now turned into a killing field because of a visionless government. In the savannah, by the time it gets dark at 6:30, you have to leave. Women have to leave. There's no safe space for them there. But the United National Congress, under Kamala Prasad, we have the ideas of how to improve the infrastructure of the government, of the savannah. How to make it a safe space where our public can interact with that green space that we have. To make it safe for all our people. This government under Keith Christopher Rowley are bereft of ideas in order how to alleviate the suffering of the people. And that collective indifference that has permeated to all levels of our society, whether it be media, whether it be the poor and working class, whether it be our upper middle class or upper class so-called people in Trinidad and Tobago. There's a collective indifference across the board. That comes from the leadership or the absence of leadership for the last 8 years in Trinidad and Tobago. Suffice it to say, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, that when you cut all avenues that are traditionally, historically available for the poor and working class to lift themselves out of poverty, what do you expect will happen? And 8 years, as we say in sociology, that's 2 cycles, 2 generational cycles. Gabrielle Raphael, who suffered that tragic senseless murder, she would have gone through 2 generational cycles under Keith Christopher Rowley. Are you telling me that this PNM government, that is so intellectually bankrupt, so devoid of compassion for our people in the disadvantaged communities, could not have put things in place? They have not. We are not just talking in the wind here. We are talking based on what we have seen. When Patrick Manning, Kamla Prasad successor, opened up gates, increased funding, what did Rowley do? Rowley not only closed that gate, he shut it in your face. When Kamla Prasad successor gave laptops to ensure that our poor and disadvantaged people were part of the system, part of the digital generation going forward, what did Rowley do? He told the black and brown people of the East-West Corridor and South and Central that the UNC thing they done see, that laptops were needed, and then found themselves scrambling like a madman to get laptops for the children when COVID arose in the country. This is a sign of a vigilant leader. This is a sign of a leader without compassion. And this is a dangerous place that our country is now in. And we keep referring to Gabriel Raphael. But let's look no further than, and I'm sure MP Padarat will touch on it, the children that are in our institutions in the Children's Authority, that I dealt with personally, like Simeon Daniel and Antonio Francois. Two 15-year-old kids who were brutally murdered because they were about to expose a pedophile ring that had been taking place within their residence. They were being abused. The key Christopher Rowley, whose portfolio includes gender and child affairs, did he even once mention their tragedy? Did he address it in any way? Never. As a matter of fact, a report sits on his desk to this day that dealt with those boys. So I know while we are wishing our mothers a happy Mother's Day, and we are so proud of our mothers and what they have accomplished, what they have worked and struggled and sacrificed for, we also have to bring you as the UNC, as a United National Congress that keeps this government in check. We have to bring you the realities of our situation. The reality is that nothing will improve under this government led by Keith Christopher. Nothing. As Maya Angelou once said, if somebody shows you who they are, believe them, and he has shown us countless times who he is. This is a man, unless it's a benefit from his financiers, or his friends, or his family, he's not interested. The whole place could burn down. Trinidad and Tobago could go to hell. Women could be killed right under Whitehall. No problem for Keith Christopher. He will go to Barbados to sort out his affairs. So people of Trinidad and Tobago, as I close, I would like us to have some self-reflection as a people. To realize that the indifference of a leader, the lack of empathy of a leader, permeates throughout the society. It clearly does. It clearly does. I can give you countless examples over history. Keith Rowley has brought us to this pass. Just the mere fact that you can have a Minister of National Security who the whole country wants to see go, and go yesterday, he decides to keep him only for political gamesmanship. Only because he's there and he can take that criticism and Keith Rowley can remain in power. We have to recognize that this is a government not interested in governance, but in power for their own financial benefit. So I ask the country on this beautiful Mother's Day, where I remember my own mother, my own grandmothers, their struggles, the mothers of my children, I wish to all of you blessings, and from the United National Congress, all the love that we can muster as men, as brothers and sisters in the world. And I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nakib, for raising some of the critical issues affecting us right now. On Wednesday, May 10th, the Parliament was summoned for us to debate the report of the Standing Finance Committee that dealt with the mid-year review. Many of you would have noted that the government came to the Parliament asking for $3.8 billion, not 3.8 million, $3.8 billion as a supplementation with respect to our annual budget. That would have taken government's expenditure up to over $62 billion for this financial year. The Minister of Finance has been parroting, followed by the Prime Minister and others, that they are balancing the budgets since they have come into power. Nothing has been further from the truth. What we have seen happen last Wednesday was that we saw a continuation of under-budgeting. So government will come with a fiscal package in October, almost every year, of $57, $58, $59 billion. And then in the mid-year review, come for an additional $5 billion. Ballooning the national expenditure, the budget, to crossing $60 billion annually. Therefore, the continued deficit budgeting is a feature of this People's National Movement administration. But the Minister of Finance, in an attempt, and I say an attempt, because there are people in this country, and I know the Minister of Finance don't like to hear this, but there are people in this country like Kamla Persad-Bissessar, like David Nakib, like myself, like others in our party, together with senior economists in Trinidad and Tobago, who understands the reality of the economics, will call out Keith Rowley and Colm Imbert for the liars that they are. For the past few years under this administration, we have continued to see deficit budgeting. There has been nothing about balancing the books. The minister has been manipulating facts. The minister has been manipulating figures to attempt to give him an outcome that he wants. And this morning we call out the Minister of Finance for that. But I will tell you why once more. On May 10th, when we went into the debate into the Parliament, there were critical areas such as the Children's Authority, the Office of the Prime Minister, President's House, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, Ministry of Public Utilities, Ministry of Health, Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, Ministry of Rural Development. There were almost 15 heads in terms of the expenditure that we are being asked to pass in the Parliament for additional monies to be supplemented to those votes. The Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, was the first off the bat to respond on behalf of the Opposition, giving a comprehensive overview in terms of the macroeconomics, debunking the lies of Colm Imbert. The government chose to duck, run, hide, and truncate the debate. There were several members, if not all the members of the opposition, who participated in the Standing Finance Committee. I know seated on the front row, Dr. Munilal, MP Indara Singh, MP Rodney Charles, MP Saddam Hussein, myself, MP Parry and others. We were prepared to participate in that debate and hold the government to account. It is a shame, it is a tragedy, and it is a disgusting display of politics by the People's National Movement, Colm Imbert and the Prime Minister, to shut down that debate so that we will not ask the critical questions and hold them accountable on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. There are senior members of the cabinet who will now get additional funding through the supplementation of billions and millions of dollars that have not accounted to the Parliament, that did not answer the burning questions. And I saw the Minister of Finance ranting and raving in his winding up, saying that MP Munilal and myself, that we were pretending as though that they didn't answer questions. I want to say to the Minister, you can play smart with foolishness all you want, but you failed, your government failed to respond to the critical areas that we raised in the Standing Finance Committee. You attempt to truncate the debate. The Deputy Speaker was in the chair. And I know that it is not often that members of Parliament will reflect on the Deputy Speaker or the Speaker of the House. But I stood up in that Parliament and I said, you must take off your Balize hat, Deputy Speaker, because you are sitting in the chair. The Deputy Speaker, I made eye contact with him and I told him I am next to enter the debate. Refusing to allow myself, MP Munilal and others to participate in that debate is a travesty that we continue to see experience in the Parliament. And I often say, I often say to colleagues, and I often say to citizens in this country, sometimes you only see when the camera is focused on the Speaker of the House. You do not understand what we go through. You do not understand the challenges that we face in terms of getting our voices. And sometimes when we have to behave abrasive and we have to stand up and fight for you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, understand that it is coming from a place where we have no alternative but to take on that persona and challenge the PNM, whether it's in the Speaker's chair through the Deputy Speaker or the government themselves. I want to turn your attention particularly, today I know Senator Nakit spoke about the fact that it's Mother's Day. But how many mothers in this country have lost their lives? How many children? Senator Nakit, I know personally. You know, in Hinduism, there's something called Bandara. And today on Mother's Day, I know people whose children have been murdered, that today that they invited me for that Bandara, that prayers that usually happens 13 days after the funeral. And I said to myself, on Mother's Day, for children to have to perform these last rites for a mother, or for a mother to have to see the last rite being performed for their child, can you imagine what pain and suffering that is? But the murders continue to go unabated, where you have a Prime Minister who gave a national award to the same president of the university last year, giving him a doctorate at Howard University this year. If that is not a classic case of you scratch my back and I will scratch yours, I do not know what is. Instead, he has told the people of Trinidad and Tobago, like what he did when he was going to Barbados, to hell with you! I will enjoy the perks of office, and I leave you to fend for yourself because you like it so. That is essentially what Pete Rowley has said to you. But brothers and sisters, there's an interesting development that has happened with respect to the Children's Authority. And purely coincidental, Senator Nakid, it is a matter that is being raised on a day like today. It was meant to be raised in the Parliament when I spoke on Wednesday. But because of the government's approach to truncate the debate, we did not have that opportunity where we could grill them, where we could ask the critical questions. But this morning I will use this platform to ask those critical questions and to expose the hypocrisy of this government. Today I want to say that we have come full circle with the Children's Authority and the protection of the rights and privileges of our children in this country, who are the most vulnerable in our society. Despite the wailing, the weeping, the crocodile tears, the gnashing of teeth by this hypocrite, Ayanna Webster Roy, who elements in the media continue to prop, she has been in the position of Minister of Gender and Child Affairs for the past 8 years. no other responsibility. But instead of seeing our children being protected, where steps are taken by the government to ensure that they are well taken care of, we see that the Children's Authority and the sector continue to decline. Today, there's a complete disregard for the children's welfare. There's a complete disregard for their needs, and there's a complete disregard for their protection. In the budget of 2022-2023, October, I told of the Children's Authority reaching out to me, a member of the opposition who's the shadow minister with responsibility for children's affairs. The Children's Authority felt that they had no other avenue. They could not even go to their line minister. So when the Prime Minister wants to talk about there's only one government in Trinidad and Tobago, that one government the people of Trinidad and Tobago does not have faith in. And therefore the institutions are now depending on Kamla Prasad, the successor, and the opposition to be their voice. And this morning, I want to remind Trinidad and Tobago, when I stood in the Parliament in October for the budget, I spoke about the Children's Authority coming to me and asking for me to raise that they had requested $180 million as their budget for the Children's Authority to deal with the plethora of issues, including the children's homes, but not limited to that. They also spoke to me about the myriad of cases of child abuse, of investigations that needs to be addressed at the Children's Authority. And therefore, when they requested the $180 million in the annual budget, they took all of those things into consideration, knowing that they were charged with the responsibility of protecting our most vulnerable, our nation's children. You know what the Minister of Gender and Child Affairs responded to me when I raised that issue, Ayanna Webster-Roy? In the most callous and disgusting manner. She said, you cannot always get what you want.
Wow.
Today, we are seeing the effects of that position adopted by the Minister and her government. We were told of the Justice Judith Jones report, which came out last year, March. What has the government done with that report since then to now? The government gave a deadline. This was not my deadline, Senator Nakin, This wasn't your deadline. At that time, Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi came to the Parliament and he said, we are going to put systems in place to ensure that all these children's homes that house children, that see after their needs, their welfare and their protection, that by March 31st, of 2023, all of them will fall under this licensing regime. Right. We did not give the government that date. And in order for these homes to fall under the licensing regime, they needed to meet a criteria. And that criteria meant that the home's accommodation, in terms of the physical space, the internal security controls, together with the funding for the homes themselves and community residences and foster homes in the streets, that they will utilize all of these things to ensure that the homes are brought up to scratch and they meet the licensing regime and the requirements. March 31st come, gone. Many of the homes have not met the requirements and the government was unable to proclaim their legislation based on a day that they gave to Trinidad and Tobago. I remember when this matter was raised in the Senate, the leader of government business at that time acting was Paula Gopi-Schoon. And you know what she told you all in the Senate, Senator Nakis? You will recall when she told the country that March 31st was sufficient time, that they did not need any additional time. They will put that in place. Those were the words of the government. Now you ask yourself, why am I reminding you of these things? You see, on Wednesday when we came, there was an explanation in just a short paragraph of what the $62 million for the Children's Authority was going to do. First, we were told that they were going to upgrade accommodation. We asked, is this for head office? Is this for the children's homes? Because we were being told that one of the reasons that the community residences, nurseries, could not meet the requirements of the March 31st deadline was that they were not receiving funding. So if they need to buy bricks, cement, mortar, tile, beds for children to sleep on, and they could not meet that requirement because they did not have the funding. Where the hell the funding comes from? Not the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why I say the under-budgeting and the under-resourcing and I'll come to the staffing issue, and the Children's Authority continues to remain an issue. When I raised this matter in the Parliament last year, the Minister, Ayanna Webster Roy, she got up and she said, every time I go to the Minister of Finance and I go to the Prime Minister, they give me their support. Minister, I want to say to you this morning, because I was planning to say to you in the Parliament, that is the furthest from the truth. Because the devil is in the details. You cannot be asking for $62 million in a mid-year review when you passed a budget in October under budgeting and under resourcing the Children's Authority, knowing damn well what you were doing to the children of Trinidad and Tobago. Because Trinidad and Tobago, you have to ask yourself, what is the outcome when a government under budgets and under resources an authority like the Children's Authority charged with the responsibility of taking care of our nation's children? If they do not have security, if they do not have additional personnel, if they do not have proper staffing, the proper resources within the Children's Authority, how then are they going to protect them? It then means that the abuse continues. The perpetrators remain in the homes. And I will get to that in a very serious way in a few minutes. But it remains that the children in the homes continue to suffer. They continue to suffer because their needs, whether it's a physical environment, whether it's food, hygiene, supplies, etc., or whether it has to do with their personal security in terms of the vulnerability of children in this country. In 2021, we saw supplementation of Children's Authority, right? I pulled the figures for you all this morning. After under-resourcing and under-budgeting them in 2021, despite knowing what the Justice Judith Jones report and other reports said, they came for supplementation of $18,959,000. The Children's Authority had asked for $162 million. You know how much they gave them, Senator Nackett?
How much?
$86,775,000. Almost less than half of what they asked for. In 2022, last year, a supplementation of $28,110,000, again under budgeting, the most critical. I cannot think of any institution in this country that is more critical than the Children's Authority. Because what it means is that they have, we, parliamentarians, through the law. And let me remind this country, it was on Mother's Day that we must thank the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar. For 10 years in this country, under PNM administration, 2001 to 2010, under Prime Minister Patrick Manning, the laws of the land protecting children were now statute books. But there was no Children's Authority. And the government, just like this government, the Manning government, just like the Rowley government today, did not have the political will to bring about the Children's Authority. And it was almost, I recall this very fondly because it was something in almost every debate between 2001 to 2010. And I often refer to it as Kamala Persad-Bissessar's baby. The Children's Authority was something that she hammered home, she advocated for over and over and over again. And it took her, with God's will, to become the Prime Minister of this country for the Children's Authority to come about. And therefore, that is why today I say that is the most critical institution in this country. $62 million being appropriated. But we have asked critical questions. Last year, I asked the Minister, I said, Minister, how many members of staff does the Children's Authority require to operate at its maximum? She told me 942. This year, at a joint select committee, the director of the Children's Authority told us, how many people is at the Children's Authority working in terms of personnel out of the 924? 222. And you expect, with a staff of 222, even though you need 942 to be operating at its optimum, and you have been there for 8 years, and you have not been able to fill the vacancies of over 600 positions. I asked the Minister in the Standing Finance Committee, I said, Minister, what are you doing about this matter? Well, I found it most incredulous. The minister said to me that after 8 years, they are now doing a review of the organizational structure of the Children's Authority. Unable to fill over 600 positions in the Children's Authority, you are now looking at an organizational review. I said, Minister, tell me something. You know, abuse is something that children, most importantly, they need help with. How many child psychologists does the Children's Authority? The minister with responsibility for children affairs in this country could not tell me. She said, I'll have to get back on to you. Yeah, if that is not shameful, disgraceful, and disgusting, you may find my words a little harsh this morning, but on Mother's Day, these were the questions I wanted to ask in the Parliament.
You have to.
And you cannot tell me you have the responsibility for protecting our children and ensuring that they get the help that they need, and you don't know how many child psychologists is in the system at the Children's Authority. Senator Nakit, there's another matter that I wanted to raise, and that has to do with the internal security controls at the Children's Authority. I told you we got a 2-line paragraph when the Standing Finance Committee met, and we were told that part of the $62 million will be for the internal security system at the Children's Authority to have an overview of all children's homes. So my question to the minister and the government this morning is, for the past 2 years, what has been happening? What existing internal security controls are there at the Children's Authority to have an overview of all these children's homes? You have known about the abuse through your report for the past 2 years, maybe. But you cannot tell the country of what you're telling us what is coming, an internal security system to look over all the children's homes, and part of the 62 million will be spent for that. But you cannot tell us what currently exists. Because if you cannot tell us what currently exists, it means nothing exists. And if nothing exists, it means that the children continue to be abused at the homes without any oversight. And I asked this question at the Standing Finance Committee. And the minister, and Minister Young, said, well, we can't go into the security details in terms of the project itself. I said, I'm not asking you to tell me how much policemen watching in children's home, no. What I'm asking you to tell me is whether or not there are cameras in the homes. Because I do not see that as being a national security issue if everybody in the country knows that there are security cameras in the home. It then tells every visitor in that home, it then tells every person working in those homes, hey, be on your P's and Q's, because everybody in this country knows that you're being watched at the children's homes. But absolutely no answer coming from the minister, because there's no answer. Tanaki told us there's no sense of urgency. You know why? Because it is not their children. And I've often said, we have seen an Attorney General refuse to acknowledge his 2 gun-toting children on the front pages of our newspapers. You have seen others who refuse to acknowledge their children held with drugs in this country. So therefore, are you surprised when they refuse to protect our nation's children? If they refuse to acknowledge and accept their own, because it's politically expedient for them to do so. And those are the critical areas with respect to the Children's Authority. But there's one other matter that I want to raise. And I have advised, and I will say this right off the bat, when those family members approached me, I've advised them to take this matter to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, to take this matter to the Children's Authority. But there's a question that I want to ask this morning, and I want to tell the minister, you can run, but you cannot hide. Should you fail to give us this information, we will use the legal avenues that we have through the Freedom of Information and other legal avenues to find out the information. Because this too is an indictment on not only Ayanna Webster Roy, but the entire government, who loves to portray themselves as the saviors of the children of Trinidad and Tobago. When we see in every sector, whether it be education, healthcare, but more importantly, also the Children's Authority, This morning I want to ask the minister, and it is an issue that I'm going to keep alive. There are relatives of children in children's homes in this country who have brought to my attention, and I repeat, I have advised them to take the matter to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and to raise it with the Children's Authority. Of teenage girls in the children's homes who are pregnant. I'm told that there is, and I will not name the home, but this is the information that has been shared with me, and as I said again, we've asked the family to take it to the TTPS. But there are homes that we are told where teenage girls are pregnant. And I'm asking the Minister with responsibility for Gender and Child Affairs to indicate to the population over the last 8 years under your watch, because you know this government likes to give the impression that the Children's Authority was something established by the partnership and therefore we did nothing with it after. Because the legislation is enacted, we needed to rework the legislation. The legislation was not perfect. We needed to find accommodation. We needed to put the infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure, but also the infrastructure in terms of a board, operations, etc. It took us some time. And the Children's Authority came up into operations in 2014. By 2015, we were out of the government. And therefore, this new government came in. And they have been there for 8 years. And they essentially took over at the infantile stage of the Children's Authority. And therefore, all the developments over the years, and I heard Minister Imbert say, this is the most sum the Children's Authority ever get under the PNM. My friend, you took over the Children's Authority when the Children's Authority came in. And therefore, no other government really had any budgeting for them. But I could tell you, had it been a Kamla Prasad administration, the Children's Authority, like the Children's Lifeline, would not have been understaffed, under-resourced, and underfunded. And therefore, I asked the minister this morning to tell the country for the past 8 years how many girls in the homes across Trinidad and Tobago under the purview of the Children's Authority became pregnant in those homes. What became of the babies? What became of those teenage mothers? What became of the persons, most importantly, that impregnated those young girls? We will move heaven and earth to get that information. Because I saw the minister and several of them, they come to the parliament and very often, some of us, we reflect on our own children. But you cannot sanctimoniously and hypocritically boast about your own children when you cannot protect the needs, the rights, the privileges, and the innocence of our nation's children. Like many of you, I have a girl child, but it's not restricted just to girl children. Abuse is something that we have seen in this country affecting both boys and girls. There's another matter that I wanted to raise, and that has to do with the public discourse on the children of Venezuelan migrants in this country. And I've seen the pushback from nationals in some quarters, not all, but I've seen the pushback from some nationals on the issue of these migrant children being given access to education. I've also seen religious leaders. I've seen groups, civil society, calling for these children to be given access to education. Where have you all been living? It was months ago. Months. The leader of the opposition, Kamla Prasad, says, stood on a platform and publicly called for the government to educate migrant children. Myself, Senator Naked, and others, we have been following up on that call inside and outside of the parliament. And for those of you who have been pushing back on that idea, not everybody in this country, I want to say to you that if we continue, the government recognizes these migrants in the country. They are allowed to work. They have been given permission to work. They have been registered in our country. And they have been acknowledged by the government. as working legally in this country, those of them that have been registered. And if we leave their children out of the school system, what becomes of those children? And those of you who are pushing back, I want you to understand it, because I've seen several groups from civil society, they are now making the point. If you leave these children outside of school, what is the alternative? Where do they go? What life do they have? And for many of them, it will be one alternative, and that is a life of crime. When you see a mother standing under a bypass, I have seen personally, particularly Senator Naked, the suffering of children generally hurts all of us. But I have a partial, especially when I see girl children. Not that it is more important than boy children, but I see it every day at the San Fernando Wharf of migrants, mothers who are unable to leave their children unattended to go and work with their young baby girls there and their boy children. And understand it, Trinidad and Tobago, that if we do not force the government into ensuring that these children get a chance at education, the alternative is that we are continuing to breed a generation of children who will have who will feel as though that they have no alternative to provide for themselves and their families other than through crime. And that becomes the bigger issue in this country. And if people in this country are so myopic, unable to see that, of the social and economic repercussions that it will have and the ripple effect that it will have further down the road, then really we are going down a very, very, very dangerous path. On the issue of a few party matters, before we take questions, on the issue of party matters, the United National Congress, through our General Secretary Peter Canhai, has put out a public notice on the 13th of May 2023, and it reads, UNC to commence screening for local government elections. Please take note that the United National Congress will commence screening of the hundreds of persons who filed nominations to represent the UNC at the upcoming local government elections as councillors and aldermen. You will recall that our political leader last year had opened nominations for the local government elections, and therefore we are announcing that screening will commence, and a date in terms of when that screening will commence will be advised to the national community. It goes on to say, further, in response to the numerous requests from others seeking to become candidates for the UNC, the party will reopen nominations. I know, Senator Nakib, there has been a plethora of persons expressing their interest. Like trees last minute, now that election fever is hitting Trinidad and Tobago, many persons are now expressing their further interest in terms of nominations. So therefore, candidates, in terms of persons wishing to put in a nomination for the UNC, the party will reopen nominations for 1 week, from Monday 15th of May, that's tomorrow, 2023, to Monday 22nd of May, 2023. I repeat those dates, Monday 15th May, 2023, to Monday 22nd May, 2023. Nomination forms are available at the UNC's headquarters in Chaguanas, building number 5, our new headquarters, building number 5, Molchan Siuchan Road, Chaguanas. I will share the telephone numbers so that you can make your inquiries. For those of you wishing to file a nomination, you can reach the Secretariat at 636-8145 or 636-9923. Once more, 636-8145 or 636-9923. There's one developing matter, and the Trinidad Express this morning has a headline that says, gearing up for possible polls. You would recall that it was the United National Congress, in our firm belief that the government has acted illegally to postpone local government elections, that we took that matter to court. a determination and a judgment on this matter will be made by the Privy Council on Thursday of this week. I believe that will be Thursday, the 18th of May 2023. We look forward to the ruling of the Privy Council. We wish to thank the advocates, the attorneys, the National Executive, our leader, etc., for continuing the fight for the protection of the rights, privileges of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, but also for the preservation of our democracy. And this is a fight that the United National Congress has always been known for peace, for social justice, for ensuring that there is no inequity in the system, and ensuring that our citizens are empowered through their constitutional rights. So we look forward to the judgment on Thursday, 18th, 2023 of May from the Privy Council on this matter. And we thank our advocates, our attorneys once more, National Executive and our political leader for continuing that struggle in the preservation of our democracy. So I think at this time, a lot has been said. I know we have a lot to digest, but those were some of the issues that we believe that were crucial to raising with you this morning. I will now take questions, both Senator Naked and myself, that is, will now take questions on the matters that we've raised and any other matter that the media wishes.
We have a question from Akar Samu of Guardian Media. Yesterday, the Commissioner of Police rated her performance thus far as excellent. Do you agree with that statement? If not, why? If yes, why?
Well, if the Commissioner of Police can rate a performance as excellent when we have 7 murders a day, when we have a continuing decline of civility, there's a national feeling. And I remember one Prime Minister previously stated that it's not so much about the crime, but the perception of crime and the feeling you get. He now heads this government. So the feeling about crime in the country is one that we're in a very, very dark place. And that's borne out by the statistics. And if she can still rate herself as excellent, then we have to say that anybody who comes under the jurisdiction of this government or involved in this government, they become delusional. She has shown that she is now completely delusional. And she should apologize to the nation for making that statement. What she should have said is that this is a work in progress. I am trying my hardest. I will stick to the job. But things tend to happen when we start to deal with tea and crumpets. And that's our priority rather than dealing with the crime that affects all of us in this country.
I just want to add that it appears as though that the Commissioner of Police, that the Tea Party continues. And therefore the question must be asked of the Commissioner of Police. As the Tea Party continues under her watch, what is she celebrating in terms of excellence? And respectfully, Mr. Samru, I think that is probably a follow-up area that you may wish to raise with the Commissioner of Police. Because we must be able to find out, and the Commissioner must qualify the statement. The Commissioner cannot just make an off-the-cuff statement as she giggled along the way, hand in hand with a clueless Minister of National Security. She was a responsibility to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And despite the frolicking and the tea partying and the celebrating of what is now being coined as excellence, or excellent, I think really the Commissioner of Police needs to tell us, in her quest to celebrate her excellence, what exactly is she celebrating and what exactly is excellent about 7 murders in a day and limbs being found in rivers and so on in this country, and major issues of drugs and so on continue to remain unabated.
Senator Naked, you mentioned the young lady who was found murdered in the Queen's Park Savannah, and the fact that she was a mother of 5 and had a difficult life according to reports from those who knew her. What more could be done to help women in these kinds of circumstances?
Well, if the government hadn't shut down the normal social structures that show up for poor and disadvantaged communities. We would not have seen the widening of these gaps. Under Kamala Prasad Visesa, we had the baby grant, we had grant for single mothers, we had a whole host of policies, not events. This PNM government is a government of events. What we would have done is exactly have continued on the policy level. Because you have to remember that we have a government here that has replaced the policies of Kamala Prasad Visesa with a lot of high profile happenings and events that they think is substantive. And we are seeing the effects of that now. Not only that, so long we have seen a savannah in 2023 that looks like the savannah in 1923. We got our independence decades ago, and this PNM government has been in charge of that. At what point in time will this visionless, rudderless PNM government, especially this one by Christopher Rowley, think that we need to put cameras in savannah? We need to put cameras in the savannah and in places that people would like to go. And our population across Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, I have people a lot up and down the East-West corridor who come just to enjoy that space. At what point in time will they improve that infrastructure that we can enjoy that space and not feel, as soon as it becomes that, we have to get out a dodge. Because God knows what will happen to our daughters, our children, and our mothers. So I think this has shown once again, and the unfortunate tragic death of Gabriel Raphael has highlighted the incompetence, the visionless policy of this Christopher Rowley government.
Auntie Padra, do you think more can be done to protect children who have lost their parents or guardians as a result of crime?
Most definitely. Political leader Kamala Prasad Visesa, a few months ago, we often see the opposition, apart from pointing out the inadequacies and challenges, we also offer solutions. We have ideas. That is why we were able to have such a successful administration between 2010 and 2015. And one of the things that Mrs. Prasad Visesa has been advocating for has been for a fund to be established for children under the age of 18 to be able to access for their own needs, their education, their personal needs, etc. Children whose parents have been victims of crime, particularly murder. We continue to see, and Senator Nakit spoke about Ms. Raphael. Ms. Raphael was just 24, 25 years old, but there are so many children that are still in the system under the age of 18 who don't know where their next meal is coming from, who continue to face abuse, who continue to face so many social injustices and challenges that really leaving these children rudderless, leaving them orphaned without giving them a chance at life really is criminal. And therefore, I strongly believe that one of the ways in which Trinidad and Tobago and the government can seriously impact children who have been orphaned, who have lost parents, breadwinners, because of crime and murder in particular, could be by financially supporting those children. Now, they will say that there are things like grants of disability and public assistance and so on. I don't know if this government knows what it is like to go to the supermarket and pay for a tin of milk for $150. You're getting a public assistance grant of $800 a month. $150 for a tin of milk. On top of that, you have to send children to school. You have to pay for their transportation costs. You have to pay for clothing. You have to pay for their personal hygiene, etc. And these children really are left without any alternative and pretty much are just surviving day to day on the kindness of strangers. You know, I recall there was a book many of us did for school, where the author said, the little child said, "Kind sir, can I have some more, please?" Remind me of that book,
Oliver
Twist. Kind sir, can I have some more, please? And many of our children, that's the situation that they face. They are like beggars, beholden to somebody who can give them a $5 or $10, and there's no real way forward in terms of how they will have a chance at a successful life. And one of the ways I think that can be brought about, is through the establishing of that fund, but also by giving greater support to these homes, these civil society groups. But it begs also the question, who guards the gods? And we were told that the people who were responsible for empowering these children were the ones that took their innocence. And if the government cannot strengthen these institutions, it really asks and begs the question of who guards the gods. And I will reflect on a situation that occurred at the Children's Authority a few months, if not a few years ago, where the director, I believe, of the Children's Authority took children out of the homes and took them to her private residence. Now, I'm not casting any aspersion of what occurred and what didn't occur. But when you have persons charged with that responsibility, feeling that they can take a child home and hug them up in the same bed that they're sleeping with, something is really fundamentally wrong. And those are the kind of things that we need to straighten and fix if we are to give these children a greater chance. But it's not just a matter of children in these homes. They are children who have been orphaned. They are children whose parents have been victims of crime. They are children whose families simply cannot afford. There's massive unemployment in this country, whether the government likes to believe it or not. So the children in children's home are just part of it. But there are also many children throughout this country who face those real challenges. You know, I see, especially by UWI, and I often say to myself, what a tragedy, what an irony. When you're driving out of the University of the West Indies on the highway side, you will see the amount of children selling tomatoes, baygan, bodi, orange, at the side of the road, coming knocking on your glass. And sometimes you don't want the item or you don't need the item, but the innocence and the pain on those children's face, you feel compelled. But that's a one-time instance. How many people would have passed those children and say, well, I feel sorry for them, but have done nothing. It is the responsibility of the state, and that's why we are raising these things, solutions like what Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar has put forward. And I'm almost certain with the Kamala Prasad-Bissessar administration in the future, it is something most definitely that Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar will hold herself to.
On an issue that's not related to what was discussed this morning, in an article today, an international relations expert has said that the opposition leader was out of place and out of line to write to the Barbados Prime Minister. Do you care to comment on that?
Well, part of my degree is in international relations, and I think that international relations expert is no expert, and he himself is out of touch, and he himself is past and out of place. I saw last night CNC3 consulted with political scientist Professor Mukesh Basdeo, and Professor Basdeo raised the more critical issues, which has to do with holding the government to account. If the government is complicit in this matter, as is being suggested in many quarters, the constitutional authority that has the legal power and the moral authority in terms of the leader of the opposition. I presented in my previous incarnation. I wore a hat of Deputy Head of Ceremonials for Protocol, etc. at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when we had the Summit of the Americas and so on. So I'm very familiar with this issue. So there are persons who pretend to be impartial and third-party validators, etc., wearing their Balisay coats and their Balisay hats, sitting in organizations like the University of the West Indies, pandering to the government's narrative, instead of doing what is right on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So I think that is complete rubbish coming from that professor. I can understand why maybe he was probably one of those that recommended the Prime Minister and the President of Howard University for the National Award and the doctorate. But Mrs. Prasad Bissessa was well within her right. Constitutionally, that is the power given to the leader of the opposition to challenge, to question a matter that deals, and let us not forget, the government will have us believe, and I'm not going into the substantive matter, but the government will have us believe that the constitutional rights of Brent Thomas was not infringed in any way. But the leader of the opposition, who swore an oath to do right by all manner of people without fear or favor, is holding true to the constitutional remit that she has and the moral obligation that she has to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So Professor Knight is speaking complete rubbish, and Mrs. Prasad Bissessa, as indicated by Professor Bastille, is fulfilling her constitutional obligations.
Well, I will answer it, because international relations is not a part of my degree. It is my degree. My undergrad degree from American University, School of International Service. And I would say categorically, there is no way written in international relations, especially given the system of governance that we have, where we are the loyal opposition. Kamala Prasad Bissessa has a right to question anything with any government. And a judgment, to MP Paradat's point, a judgment has been delivered, where a judge found that Brent Thomas was abducted. He was abducted. That is the judgment given. Now the government has made an appeal, but that is aside from the original ruling of the judge. Meaning that once that has been made, that ruling has been made, and his constitutional rights were infringed, Kamala Prasad Bissessa, noting that this government must have been complicit with what happened to one of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in a foreign jurisdiction, and they now, the burden on them must be to prove that that judge made an illegal or a ruling that was not in line with what they are saying. No one can question Kamala Prasad Bissessa's right to not only question that foreign country, but to delve deep into the issues concerning the rights of one of our nationals, whoever he may be. So I think Professor Andy Knight, and I will mention his name, I think he has shown himself to be a sycophant. I think his statement today is in line with many of the sycophants that we see trying to show up what appears to be very much so a tyrannical and dictatorial government under King Christopher Rowley.
We just have two more questions from Richard Khan from Guardian Media. Based on what was said about the honor to Dr. Rowley from Howard University, what do you believe are the implications of this move? And do you believe more is afoot with this award?
Well, I'll take that one first because I do know the president personally. Spent some time with him in London, Dr. Wayne Fredericks. He went to St. Mary's College as I did, after I did. And there's no doubt that he achieved excellence in his profession. But I think he was way off the mark here. If you listen carefully to his laudations of Christopher Rowley, almost every single thing he said MP Padara was misplaced.
I think Akash Samaru's expression when reading the news
exactly.
Wonderful roads and
infrastructure and his progress in education. I think it was laughable to who knows the true story. So I do not know if Fredo, as we call him, Dr. Wayne Fredericks, who I admit is a friend, I do not know if he was given a script to read MP Padara and read it without fact-checking, but I think when he looks at it, he hasn't lived in Trinidad, but he comes and he visits, so he must have been aware. But as MP Padara, and I hold no brief for anyone who I feel is hypocritical. I hold no brief for anyone. And if he thinks that Keith Rowley has done a fantastic job, if he wrote that script himself, then he should apologize to the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. He should give back the award that Rowley bestowed upon him, or the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and then take back that doctorate from Keith Christopher Rowley, who not only doesn't deserve a doctorate, but in my opinion, based on his behavior in public office, should be facing charges for misbehavior in public office.
I think there is something greater afoot here with respect to this particular development. And this has to do with the propping of a failed leader. The government is going into a local government election this year. And many feel in this country that a general election will come sooner rather than later, especially with the current pulse of the population reaching tipping point. And the Prime Minister has, for the past 8 years, failed to deliver on any mega projects that directly impact the lives of people in Trinidad and Tobago. The quality of life of citizens have gotten worse instead of getting better. And people feel a total sense of anarchy, a total sense of hopelessness in this country. And the government, through this development, and we have to call them out and see it for what it is. And this is just not happening coincidental or by accident. This is happening by design. They are using their tentacles, their P&M tentacles in institutions, both locally and abroad, to prop a failing, now when say a failing, a failed Prime Minister and a failed political leader. Dr. Rowley has not been able to substantially in any way improve the lives of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And no amount of going abroad and writing scripts for persons to read about the wonderful roads and the infrastructure and the development in education and so on will fool the people of Trinidad and Tobago. They live the poor infrastructure, the crumbling, dilapidated, dysfunctional infrastructure in this country. They live in a country where you dodge potholes as much as you dodge bullets. But they also live in a country where there's no access to education in any meaningful way, with the cuts in gate, with the lack of technology in our system through the laptops, the connectivity, etc. So this, we must call it for what it is. It is a feeble, weak attempt to prop a failed Prime Minister and political leader of the PLM.
The final question to Senator Naked. Pandit Satyanand Maharaj has sent out a pre-action protocol letter for defamation over a social media video. Do you care to comment?
Yes, of course. I think this is another attempt by Satyanand Maharaj to put himself in the spotlight. He issued the pre-action protocol letter that basically was a transcript of what I said, completely eliminating or avoiding what he said. And I think the majority commentators from both political sides and most of the social commentators have indicated that his comments were indeed divisive and racist. And we stand by that, and we say that there's no room for that kind of rhetoric, for that type of stereotyping, no room for that kind of prejudice, especially coming from someone who calls himself a religious leader. And we look forward to letting it be known that it's exactly what we spoke about earlier, that we should be careful of the kind of narrative that we tend to digest from people who purport to be leaders in this country.
That's all the questions I have.
Well, thank you, members of the media and the national community, for joining us today. We have raised some of the more critical areas that are currently affecting our nation, but as much as there's pain and sorrow throughout this land, we want to take the opportunity to wish all mothers and those who act as mothers in terms of fathers who are single parents, etc., performing both roles. We want to wish you a very happy Mother's Day. We ask that Almighty God continue to bless each and every one of you. It will be remiss of me not to single out our political leader, the Honorable Kamla Prasad-Bissessa, who has really been, I know personally, for me and for many of our young parliamentarians, those who hold positions in our party, and even the national community, for her continued strength, guidance, and love. Sometimes that is so much needed to carry on our work and our daily activities. So to Mrs. Basad Bisessa and to all UNC mothers and all mothers of our nation, we wish you a very happy Mother's Day. And we say on this day, thank you for all that you do and all that you continue to do in Trinidad and Tobago. May Almighty God continue to bless our nation. And let me remind you that our Monday night meeting will take place at the Gasperal Secondary School, headlined by the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisessa and MP Anita Paines. And we look forward to you joining us there in person from 7 p.m. or for you to tune on your devices and view us on our social media and traditional media platforms. So thank you for joining us, and may God continue to bless you and bless our wonderful nation. Good day.